one of the things that is immutable law, the flying air show formation flying with the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels, is it is the most intense concentration you will ever have at any time for an extended period of time. One of the great adventures of my life was that I got to spend summers down in Siesta Key, Sarasota, Florida, a lot of the time that I was growing up. My father was in the Navy and was a naval aviator, but I got to spend the time with my grandfather. His name was Rasmus Christensen, and Rasmus was a Dane. His family took him, threw him out of what is now Denmark, because his brother had been conscripted by the Prussians and died. And at a young age, they didn't want that to happen to Rasmus. So Rasmus ended up coming to the United States after 4 years on a steamship, came ashore as a machinist, joined the U.S. Navy. After 10 years, became a master machinist on a ship, saved some people in a boiler explosion, came down to Pensacola, Florida by choice of duty, and ended up within the very start of seaplane flying in the United States Navy. In 1919 was picked to fly and flew on the first flight across the Atlantic. He was knighted by the King of Portugal. He was awarded the Navy Cross by Franklin Roosevelt, presented by Glenn Curtiss, a Glenn Curtiss Award that was only presented to the first people who ever flew across the Atlantic. I spent the summers with that gentleman, and with his sense of humor and with his history, and knowing that my father was a naval aviator, it kind of forced me in my own thinking to say, I think naval aviation is where I want to go and what I want to be. From there, I went to the Naval Academy, and from there, I got into naval aviation. And during which time I was sent to VA 125, which was the training squadron for what was the A-Force Skyhawk. When I graduated from 125, I was assigned to VA 113. We deployed with the USS Enterprise as part of the Air Wing 9, and went through the end of 1966, beginning in 1967 in Vietnam. In 113, my first tour, I flew 115 or so combat sorties, and we got home, did a fast turnaround, and then deployed in early 1968 again on the Enterprise. I was coming off a strike. I was leading a 4-plane anti-SAM from VA 113. We were holding the SAMs down. Coming off of that strike is just as I was getting feet wet and trying to bring my 2-3 wing meet back, because we had SAMs, heavy SAM, and we had AAA. I was out and I was bringing them together when all of a sudden my engine started coughing and coughing and coughing, and then quit. And I tried 5 or 6 relights, got no relights. And when I got down to 2,500 feet, I said, well, it's either dump this thing and step over the side or jump over the side. And I said, I think all this training about how to get out of an airplane safely includes ejecting. As I was getting ready to eject, I was thinking, well, it's June in the Tonkin Gulf. That June is when sea snakes raft. And while they're harmless for the majority of the year, when they raft in thousands, and they become very, very protective and vicious. And I said, oh my God, what happens if I eject into the sea snakes? So all the way down, I said, sea snakes, sharks, sea snakes, sharks. And so with that, I took no time whatsoever to get in my raft. By the time we got off cruise, I was on my way to VA 174 in Jacksonville, Florida, Cecil Field, to be an instructor at VA 174. At the time, they were just into the A-7 aircraft. And I had visited the Blues on a couple of occasions. And so I got a call, and they said, it's the Blue Angels. And the first thing I heard on the phone was, Lieutenant Christensen, this is Bill Wheat, officer in charge of the Blue Angels, and we have them all right here. And the reason I call is to tell you that, you know, on the first, we don't like Naval Academy people. We have a real problem with them, and that you're a Naval Academy graduate. So here's the baseline to it. He said, I've got the other guys here, and they have something they want to tell you. And at that point, they all stood up and they said, here's to Ernie, here at last, here's to Ernie, your horse's ass. That was the song. And they said, congratulations, you are a Blue Angel. As soon as I selected, they said, hey, what we've done is we've got TRACOM going out, and we want you to go to pick up FAM hours in the F4 before you come to the team. Now, at the time, the team had nobody who were F4 pilots. I was given the 10-hour FAM syllabus out of Oceana before I joined the team, so I had second high flight time. The other guy who had been selected for the team was Steve Shoemaker, VF 96, and Steve had 2 combat tours flying the F4. The show sequences with the F11 were a little broader because they needed to maintain and sustain airspeed, so the turns weren't quite as tight. The F4 could do that, so the issue was, okay, you can change the sequence of the show to keep the show tighter in and more vertical, so the show was tighter, faster, and higher. And that then presumed us to be able to go in and do most of the same maneuvers and perhaps add some on as we went along. We all climbed in the aircraft, flew to El Centro, California in the end of December, and we just went to work. And we flew 2 to 3 flights a day. We started off by trying to keep ourselves wide and get a feel for the aircraft while we had a broad play at formation. So we'd fly maybe a 2-plane, maybe a 4-plane, and just mostly just get a feel for how it felt in formation, and we'd bring it in tighter without doing a maneuver, just to get a feel for where the forces were, where the air forces were on the aircraft. And then we would start doing things like 360 pass. The 360 pass, of course, is the right after takeoff, first time in front of the crowd showing what the diamond looks like. But that is it. I mean, we did not try to create a condition whereby we overstepped our skill level, our ability, and and our feel for what the aircraft was capable of doing. One of the things that I think it's important to recognize is the makeup of the teams in the 69-70 timeframe. When I joined the team, Bill Wheat was the lead. Bill Wheat was shot down one time in Vietnam and wounded. Vince Dinelli was stationed at Chu Lai, flew 160 missions. I don't have the exact number right now. I had 2 tours and lost 1 airplane. Rick Milson had come out of VA 192, I think it was 192, and had 1 full deployment. Number 5 was Johnny Allen, who had been an F8 driver and had a tour in Vietnam. Steve Shoemaker had 2 tours in Vietnam. Rick Adams, number 7, had been shot down twice as an F8 driver. He was the first American pilot to be combat limited by virtue of having been shot down twice. So Dick Schramm was the NFO, number 8, and he had been an A6 BN in combat. So that was the group in 1969. One of the things that a lot of people don't really realize is we weren't just playing Navy pilots. We paid the price before and paid the price after. We had some issues, but they were learning issues. But generally, it was a continue and learn and learn from what your first year was. I mean, any first year of any airshow aircraft on any airshow team is going to be a learning year, and some of the lessons are hard. In 1970 team, Harley Hall was the lead. He had had 2 tours in Vietnam. The number 2 was Kevin O'Mara. He'd flown F-4s in Vietnam. Number 3 was Jim Maslowski, who had been in my sister's squadron, VA-56, for 2 tours. I had had 2 tours in Vietnam. I was the only returning Diamond pilot. Number 5 was Steve Shoemaker, 2 tours in combat. Number 6 was Skip Umstead, Marvin Umstead. When you look at the Diamond and in the F-4s, everybody has their job. Boss is the officer in charge, he's the flight lead. Number 2 sets certain portions of the formation. Number 3 also does the same thing, and he's responsible if things change overall. Like number 4's job is first as a safety officer, and second as a training officer. And I said, I don't think that was ever more true until 1970, when nobody in the Diamond except for the safety officer and the training officer had ever flown air shows before. Harley Hall never did anything that he hadn't really prepared for. And Bill Wheat, Boss Wheat, before Harley actually took over and we went to winter training, spent a lot of time with Harley Hall, teaching him pulls, teaching him reversals, teaching him flight patterns, teaching him all the basics of leading an air show and putting it into the flight regime that it should be in. So when Harley took over as lead, he was already 75% of the way there in terms of making the right pulls, the right moves, smooth as silk. Sweet, 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 smooth as silk. And Kevin O'Mara and Jim Maslowski were rocks from the day that they arrived. They were solid, solid, solid in position. And so while I take a lot of credit, I shouldn't take any credit at all for being the training and safety officer in the slot position, because those guys were great from the start. In 70, we ended up doing Hawaii and then Central South America.
¿Está casado? Are you married?
No, I'm not. I'm very much single.
Está muy solterito. También es otra buena noticia que tienen quienes admiran.
We were down there and we had done a show in Panama, and we went down to do the shows in Ecuador. And it was a high base altitude. I think it's close to 10,000 feet base altitude where we were in Guayaquil. There were 1 million people who showed up, is what they said. And one of the things that was absolutely constantly on our mind as we went into that is the mountain range, which was right there in our show area, and that there were clouds in the mountains, and some of the maneuvers went through those clouds on the way through to show center point or through part of the maneuver. So that show site, which we finished without any major issues at all, was one that I think all of us remember exceedingly well. It was Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and it was in the latter parts of our show season summer. The weather wasn't bad, as I remember. We did a tuck under brake and land. Harley was a little fast going in with the crosswind. The same with Kevin, and Jim was on rollout when Harley started to say, "Boy, I tell you what, I'm having trouble stopping." And at that point, I should have had my gear and flaps going down. And I go head out of the cockpit and whether Ski or Kevin said, "Oh boy, I'm having trouble stopping." Oh, wow! So they were able to get off the side onto the taxiway, and I'm out there looking them on the taxiway. Harley and Kevin are out. Jim is just turning off and said, "Oh, whoo!" And so I'm watching that, and my flaps are down, but I forgot to hit my wheels down. I was head out of the cockpit the entire time. And I rolled out, and my first indication that that wasn't quite right was when I touched down, and I'm looking at the runway up here rather than down here, and it was kind of a oomph. And at that point, and I said, oh my God. That's all I could think of. Oh my God, what happened? And about that point, it was J.D. Davis. I think he was the one who said, boss, Ernie just made a gear up landing. I'm on fire. The whole bottom of the aircraft is on fire, and I'm in full burner, and I am screaming down the runway. And I'm looking ahead of me. On this side, I got crowd. On this side, I've got bleachers and crowd. And I can see only one area that I can push. And the aircraft had good rudder control because I was melted. The underside of my aircraft was melted. And I pushed right rudder. And the nose of the aircraft came around, and I was clear of crowd and clear of crowd. And I looked right in front of me, and there's Harley and Kevin. And I said, oh my God, I can't get out. And so I kicked a little bit more rudder, and I kicked enough so that I got the nose of the aircraft in front of Harley. And I was, by that time, went off the runway on fire and probably still doing 80 knots, just molten metal. And I ejected. Canopy went, chute went, and the wind was crosswind. Now that I remember, it was 15 or 25 knot crosswind. And because when I got up, I got one swing in the chute, I went flat, and it blew me back onto the runway, and I hit the runway on my back. And it started pulling me again. It was close to 30 knots of wind, and I cleared my harness and just lay there for a second. I went and spent the night in the hospital, and thank God for Harley. Harley saved my butt, and I stayed on the team and went flying. You couldn't rattle Harley. Harley was the most consistent in every aspect of his on the ground and in the air leadership. We're just so absolutely consistent. With that personality created the conditions whereby we were able, even average pilots as most of us were, to be able to fly above average air shows. And Harley was the reason. And magnificent man. And we were all fortunate to have ever had the acquaintance and the intersection of being part of his life. There is a uniqueness of the trust that is developed within each member of the team flying for that long, that close. They are tighter, closer than brother. There is no tighter closeness that occurs. And to this day, they are still my dearest friends. What you go through with them is even more so, and I had 5 tours in combat, 4 tours flying in combat, and 1 tour commanding a carrier in Desert Storm. As tight as you are with your brothers in the squadrons, and as tight as you are throughout those associations, the Blues are the tightest relationships we'll ever have.